Let me just begin by saying that that was an incredibly generous introduction. ASAP Bio is a very small nonprofit. We worked by convening meetings and providing resources surrounding issues primarily stemming from preprints. My suspicion is that this community probably has quite a lot of familiarity with these topics. But I would wonder if I could, let me see if I can actually find the control panel, or if one of the other co-hosts might be willing to launch the polls at this moment.
Yep.
Would that be possible? Okay, thank you so much. I'd love to get a sense, from among this audience, what your sort of background and feelings are about this emerging preprint ecosystem. So there's just 2 questions, and hopefully we will get a flavor of your responses soon. Okay, I'm going to click share results. And I can definitely see that the majority of the audience has read a preprint, and nearly a third have posted a preprint among responses, which is really an overrepresentation among, I think, scientists in general. And also, clearly some nuances in the question about preprint feedback, with a majority saying that all feedback on preprint should be public, but a third saying that it depends as well. So I'm really looking forward to discussing some of these issues, especially as it pertains to this kind of changing landscape that we are finding ourselves in. Okay, so I will continue now. I'll stop sharing the poll results and just say that, I think for the vast majority of you, there's no surprise in the concept of preprinting. But just to say that oftentimes preprints are often discussed as a way of making a version of the work that is open access, available to the world. And certainly the fact that preprints are free to read is generally a positive aspect, but preprints provide a much more important and fundamental function, in my view, which is that they enable broad early feedback on science in a way that can improve the final result, in a way that is really just not possible with a closed peer review process, where a small number of people are able to scrutinize that work. And of course, they also save time in not just for the authors, but for the entire community. Preprints are posted a median of 4 to 5 months before they appear in a journal in the biomedical sciences. And of course, as you can imagine, those time savings would compound over time to accelerate the process of discovery. This is a great survey run by bioRxiv, and I should say that I do have a link to the slides so that you can click through any of these resources if you're interested. I'll put that into the chat afterwards. It's also on the last slide. But just to say that preprints, I think what is motivating a lot of authors to post is the idea that this will increase awareness of research. But there's also other issues of networking, connectivity, and collaboration. I think, certainly I think that there's those of you in the audience who have interesting stories to share regarding these kind of areas. And of course, now, preprints have been undergoing a tremendous growth in the biomedical sciences over the last few years. So bioRxiv was launched late 2013. And since that time, every time we redraw this graph, it seems like there's impressive growth. But really, over the last year, especially in the current environment, preprints have taken on a new significance. Preprints on these servers now amount to 8% of the volume of items posted to PubMed on a monthly basis. So that is, every month, the volume of these preprint servers is equivalent to 8% of the volume of new work on PubMed. And I think, as you can see here, that this bar at the top, medRxiv, has experienced really significant growth. But there's also many other players in the space that did not exist a few years ago. For example, Research Square, which is operating a service called In Review in coordination with Springer Nature, is seeing a really large volume of submissions and a very high rate of authors opting in to post their submissions. The submission is kind of like integrated with the journal submission process. And I think that this growth has been bolstered and supported by funder policies that have been very progressive and very supportive of posting preprints. So, we had a meeting about preprints in early 2016, and very soon after that, the Simons Foundation was the first to really come out with this policy stating that preprints were going to be considered as valid evidence of progress for grant applications and reports. And this policy was kind of echoed by many other funders, including very significantly the NIH, which released a guide notice in 2017 that also provided guidance on how to select a preprint server, how to select a license, etc. Crossref began giving DOIs for preprints. Preprints actually started appearing on EuropePMC, which, if you are not familiar with EuropePMC, is a mirror of all the content on NIH's PubMed Central, with some additional work, and that also performs text mining and offers annotations and so forth. And they've actually started ingesting the full text of preprints around the same time that PubMed and PubMed Central have started their own pilot for NIH-funded research. So I think that the fact that preprints are now showing up on PubMed, which maybe 5 years ago even seems like a dream, is evidence of how quickly this form of communication is taking hold and becoming legitimized by the community. So we have a list of funder policies that, of course, is accessible through this link as well. I think that motivating a lot of this integration into these databases is the important role that COVID preprints are playing in overall literature about COVID. So this is from an analysis that I performed with some colleagues. I should say that this was really the work of Nicholas Fraser and Liam Brearley and Johnny Coates in kind of tagging all of these preprints, and especially in the very early days of the pandemic, preprints were forming a significant fraction of the available literature. And what I think is also striking and surprising, that this literature was really appearing on a variety of different preprint servers, though the majority was being deposited on medRxiv. And of course, that still is true, that medRxiv is playing this role as a leading preprint server for COVID-19 research. And these preprints have not only reached the research community, but they are now being discussed in the media at a level that is completely unprecedented. So we have Bloomberg, The Economist, The New York Times covering the concept, not only preprints themselves, but the concept of preprinting. And there's actually quite a bit of sort of controversy reaching these outlets surrounding the fact that a lot of research, not only on preprint servers, but also in journals who are accelerating their peer review processes, is coming out perhaps with a more accelerated scrutiny than previously before. And there's questions, of course, about how this type of communication is going to impact public health. So, to kind of take a quantitative level on this, we found that preprints are really being accessed. Those preprints, I should say, are about COVID-19 specifically, are being viewed and downloaded and cited and tweeted and included in news and blogs at a rate 15 times or higher other preprints. So there's definitely a case here where preprinting is something that I think many people saw as a way to communicate within the scientific community. But now there's also questions about how non-scientific audiences or more general audiences will interpret these papers. So ASAP.bio ran a survey where we included a variety of different stakeholders, but I should say that unsurprisingly, the people who are most willing to engage about preprints are researchers in academia. But I should say that when talking about preprinting, there's so many benefits, but we also hear a lot of concerns. So, there's concerns about sharing information publicly before peer review. What if it's incorrect? Now, clearly, peer review is going to offer no guarantee that a work is absolutely sound, but it does help in many cases to filter out and correct problems. There's concerns about information overload and commenting and scooping. But the most significant concern raised by respondents was this concept of premature media coverage of preprints. And I think this is an area where I wonder how this survey would have looked had we done this last year. I think this is an area that is a bit emerging now. And of course, just to give an example of this, this is an infamous preprint that was posted to bioRxiv, actually in two different versions. The first, on January 31st, it received a lot of attention in its very short life. It was actually retracted within a couple of days, I think within even 48 hours over the weekend. But even in that time had been used to kind of fuel and accelerate conspiracy theories about the origin of the virus. So I think on one hand, somebody might look at this and say, well, here's an example of a more open approach to sharing results that can have consequences beyond the academy. But on the other hand, the fact that this paper was actually withdrawn within such a short period of time is impossible to imagine this kind of correction occurring with this level of rapidity within the traditional journal system. So I would argue that when there is an ability for broader feedback on work, that provides the kind of fundamental scientific process, the process of self-correction, the process of scrutiny to occur faster. So, where does that sort of leave us? I think that it's no surprise then that in this environment, we have both funders like NIGMS and publishers. For example, this coalition brought together by OASPA, which is the Open Access Scholarly Publishing Association, specifically requesting that people review preprints as a way to provide sort of an adjunct to the traditional journal organized peer review process, and as a way to help readers contextualize those works as they encounter them in general. I think that when we think about preprint feedback, we often think about what is written in the comment section in bioRxiv, but this is again from the author survey. I'd be run by bioRxiv, and I'd be curious to see how this would change in the current environment. But this is the fraction of respondents, that is authors on bioRxiv, who say that they have received feedback via these different modalities. But the bioRxiv commenting section is actually a small minority of respondents. And I think that this is an area where, we can say, a critic might look at this and say, how can peer review on preprints work? Because, there's less organization, there's less pressure for reviewers to do it. However, there is a tremendous amount of feedback happening on Twitter. The question is whether this feedback is in-depth, substantial, and if it can be found and organized such that it can help other readers interpret that work if necessary. Of course, there's quite a bit of private feedback happening as well. But I want to highlight in the next few slides a kind of area which I think has grown a lot since this survey was conducted, which is the concept of a preprint discussion site or a third-party review platform for preprints. So, in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, three of the most prominent of these efforts, or three of the most kind of well-known of these efforts, include a project by immunologists at Mount Sinai, where they, if I'm characterizing this properly, they actually automatically rank preprints and select the most kind of interesting or significant for a detailed review, which gets posted in a comment on bioRxiv itself. Rapid Reviews COVID-19 is a bit of a different model. It's an editorially organized overlay journal. So there is a kind of academic editorial system where every paper that is reviewed by the service is selected, and then reviews are posted independently. And Outbreak Science is a platform in which there's a kind of very structured numerical ranking of papers. So just to show you a little bit of what this looks like, the Sinai Immunology Project, which has really great resources you can find online, even for those papers that are not, there are papers that are summarized and reviewed or vice versa, but it, especially months ago when launched, was a very comprehensive attempt to make sense of the immunology research on COVID-19. Outbreak Science, I think another very interesting feature of this platform is the ability to actually request review, so that, I think that there's this feature of preprint review, which can often feel like you're commenting into the void. But one thing that I do think is interesting about Outbreak Science is that there is this ability to indicate that a review from an expert is needed. So it's a little bit of like crowdsourcing this editorial function in a way. And again, Rapid Reviews COVID-19 is actually offering a publication option together with these unsolicited reviews. So they're going to perform the reviews regardless of whether or not the author wishes them to, but they also offer the authors an option to actually post a paper in this. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity for inspiration from the intense activity occurring on COVID-19 preprints. We have been categorizing and collecting many of these different types of review experiments in our platform, which is basically just a directory of innovative peer review projects. ASAP Bio, I should say, has also advocated for the publication of peer review reports, and also for the experimentation with new ways of both curating and providing feedback on preprints and journal articles. And so we attempt to sort of organize some of these different experiments that are occurring in the context of this site here. So I think that there's a little bit of a really fascinating, perhaps discrepancy and tension between this poll that you all very kindly filled out. I think there's this general sense that as a reader, and again, this survey, of course, was conducted before COVID, and this could be something that changes with changing understanding of the value of public feedback. But in general, authors of this bioRxiv survey preferred to receive feedback by email. And even in the bioRxiv commenting section publicly over this kind of conversation on Twitter. So I think that there's this sort of tension between what authors might want, which is feedback to improve their paper, versus what is helpful to the public or journalists or maybe a lay reader, which is really an active contextualization of work where it can be found and read in the first place. So I want to address a project that ASAP Bio has run in collaboration with EMBO. It's an ongoing experiment. It is a journal-independent peer review platform called Review Commons that I think seeks to perhaps address multiple problems at the same time. And I think that there's certain areas where these author desires and the needs of the public are things that we're trying to kind of wrap together in this platform. It is not specifically designed for outbreak science. It, as a service that, as you will see, will cater more towards the kind of cell and molecular biologist, and is definitely something that we are actually in the process of evaluating right now. So I'll share some interim results of the service, but also talk a little bit about the motivations for coming up with this project. So this is currently in the midst of a 1-year trial run that is funded by the Helmsley Trust. So the goals of Review Commons were kind of threefold, and I'll speak a little bit more about why each one of these are motivated. The first being reducing re-review, enabling more constructive review, and finally increasing transparency in the entire publishing process. So, I think that we've all had the experience of perhaps receiving, well, maybe not all of us, but I certainly had the experience of receiving a review. This says something like, this is not high enough quality or high enough impact for our journal, and provides, less constructive comments beyond that. So I want to just highlight this quote from Vivian Siegel, who was actually the editor-in-chief of Cell, and then she was the executive director of PLOS. So she's had quite a long history of not only leading journals, but also launching journals. And she basically said, I'll summarize, when a journal is new, you get different kinds of peer reviews. Reviewers would write something like, I don't know how to advise you, so I'll just tell you the strengths and weaknesses of the paper, and you will have to decide. And then the authors would also say that the reviews are constructive. So, I think when this kind of crutch of just providing a yes or no decision is removed from reviewers, is there more opportunity to focus directly on the science and improving it? The second issue is about duplicated peer review time. So I don't know if you've seen this, but AJE, American Journal Experts, has calculated, based upon the rejection rate of journals, that there's 15 million hours wasted globally every year, and this is for all domains of scholarship, on repeating peer review of manuscripts that have been rejected. So I should say that I think that some journals have figured out ways of saving this energy. And clearly there's many journals like, of course, eLife and PLOS. I think at EMBO for a long time have had a coalition of sharing and transferring peer reviews to one another. Of course, there's many other publishers that have families of journals with sister journals, and this entire hierarchy that one can enter and have a paper bounced down a certain hierarchy. So clearly there are solutions to this problem, which is to transfer the reviews among different journals. However, the fact still remains that when entering into one of these kind of publication silos, for example, submitting to a very high impact journal and then getting bumped down to successive journals, that that does kind of tend to trap authors into a certain area and perhaps disincentivizes the transfer of those reviews to other journals. And this, I think, benefits the journals that are in those large publisher silos, but puts those who are outside of them, which are often society journals, at a detriment. So this is also to say that this is a analysis of biomedical papers, finding that about half of those papers are submitted to more than one journal. So clearly there are cases where the publishing system is working very efficiently, but about half the time there's, there can be these very protracted journeys to publication that can also be accompanied by long delays from first submission to final publication. And finally, there's this issue of transparency in the peer review process. And many of the journals, actually all of the journals that are in this consortium that I'll mention, are among signatories, or really they are enabling the publication of peer review reports alongside journal articles, which, when you think about peer review, it is oftentimes and unfortunately the majority of journals, a black box where this process that we rely on to, really act as a shorthand of trust in a paper is hidden. And, it's often unclear what the process has been like, whether all parts of the paper have been scrutinized, whether there are outstanding concerns that the authors have not addressed. And, so what we have done with the service is to post the peer reviews that are conducted by the service onto bioRxiv. And so this is a part of bioRxiv's TRIP mechanism, where basically, I'm not sure if you're able to see let me bring my, I don't know if you can see my cursor here, but on the right of the screen, there is a peer review tab. And if you click this tab, a hypothesis toolbar opens, which provides peer reviews that have been reviewed by the service and author responses, if an author opts into that. So you might be wondering, okay, but what actually is the Review Commons? What have we come up with to integrate all these different features? So effectively, Review Commons is a platform that produces the opportunity to create these referee preprints and conduct this review in a journal agnostic fashion. Basically, a preprint or manuscript is submitted, EMBO coordinates the selection of reviewers, and then sends back to authors reviews for them to respond to, and then they have the opportunity to post those on bioRxiv and submit to one of 17 affiliate journals. And so effectively what this means is that the journals that you see here on the right side of the screen have all agreed to not repeat peer review. And I can say informally, based upon our analysis, that this is actually working quite well, that the journals are not going to new reviewers and are using the original reviews to kind of make their decisions. And then there's the opportunity to successively submit to multiple of these journals with the same set of reviews without the journals having the history of the submission, if you will. And then the kind of eventual publication of this work that potentially also appeared as a referee preprint earlier. And our goals are really this constructive review, the getting to publication in a more efficient fashion, avoiding review, and also providing opportunity for more transparency and perhaps more kind of meta-analysis of the reviews by the community as they're posted on the preprint. So I just want to say that Review Commons, this is a busy slide, but the main point that I want to make here is that there are a couple of other initiatives which are, I think, also offering authors the opportunity to get peer review on a preprint. And the newest of them is eLife's preprint review. Excuse me. I would say that the main difference is that in eLife, the eLife preprint review basically asks authors to submit to eLife and to go through a peer review process that is public if they opt into the service. And then if the reviews are positive, that paper is basically accepted for publication in eLife. Whereas the review commons process is designed more in a journal agnostic fashion, so that you have not actually submitted your paper anywhere to any journal until after the reviews come back. But there's also two other really cool projects, Peerage of Science, which is both of these projects have been around much longer. Peerage of Science and Peer Community In. Peer Community In offers a kind of academic editorial organization of peer review that also offers authors the opportunity to have their work kind of certified and recommended by Peer Community In. So Peer Community In is less designed as a way to create manuscripts that are ready to be submitted to a journal, because it envisions that, although they certainly can be, but that this is sort of a separate and independent validation of the process. Peerage of Science is a service that has a really interesting peer review model. I won't go into great detail here, but that also offers transfer to journals, and has actually been operating well before preprints became a widespread phenomenon in the life sciences. So we do have this blog post comparing them. I recognize that this can be a bit confusing in the same environment. For me personally, I'm thrilled to see so much activity in this space. But I just want to say that if you'd like to learn more about Review Commons, and hopefully by the time of this, certainly by the time of this webinar, we'll be able to share results from surveys and a little bit more quantitative data about the interim evaluation. We will have a webinar on the 8th. And if you're interested in this concept of media coverage of preprints, we're going to have a community call, which is going to be very focused on discussion later this month on the 27th. But all that being said, I just want to take a moment to thank my colleagues, our board, our funders. I will take this URL and put it into the chat in case you would like to look up any of these references.